Thanks all for coming. This is edition, I always have to check because it's so high the number nowadays, edition 35. Not so many people, but the people that are here, I'm very happy that they are there. We have a very special topic tonight because usually we do something either Java related or front-end related, but today we're talking about the exciting world of .NET. And I know very little about it. Well, the little I know is because we just talked about it in the podcast. But please take it away, Johan, who's going to enlighten us about Blazor.
Yeah, and that is front-end, by the way. So it's not Java, but it's C#, and it's, of course, very similar to Java because it was at the time that it was created, it was like a copy of Java, I always thought. But anyway, C# is now the main language in the Microsoft.NET world. And yeah, .NET has been around for somewhat more than 20 years now. And the Blazor is a relatively new technology. And I'm very excited about it. I've learned it, I think 2 years ago. Because at that time they asked me to set up a new architecture for new products, and then I looked around, see what's going on in technology land, and also they had .NET backend and Angular frontend. But then I discovered that Blazor is also capable of using that technology as a frontend. So we're going to have an introduction to Blazor, and maybe if we have time we also can talk a bit about integrating Tailwind and Fluxor. These are techniques that you can use in combination with Blazor, but it's not really required. So one page about me. My name is Johan Stolk. I've been programming for 40 years now, I guess. It's a long time. Seen a lot of different things. Started in BASIC. It's not something I would choose nowadays, but and also assembly is also not my cup of tea. And then C, C++, Java, and then .NET or C#. And well, nowadays I still program in .NET and also sometimes in Java because I have a great game written in Java. And using Android Studio for that. And for the .NET world, I switched to Rider. That's the JetBrains IDE for .NET, and I like it a lot. It's much faster than Visual Studio. It's much better, but of course you can also use Visual Studio or VS Code. So I've been developing in .NET since the beginning because I was at that time teaching Java courses and C++, and then .NET came and they asked me to also teach that. So it was a bit of a shock to learn that in 1 or 2 weeks, but but since then I've been doing. I quite like .NET. Before that I was doing COM, but you don't want to know. And I started actually to program because I wanted to create games, and since at that time I was 16 and now I'm 40 years older, I'm still doing games. I'm not sure why, but I guess I like it. So what is Blazor? Well, Blazor, it started as an experiment by one guy called Steve Sanderson from Microsoft, like a hobby project, and well, a lot of things have come out of that. The main thing for me is that now we can use C# as a language on the front end. Because I have done Angular and I don't like JavaScript. TypeScript is a lot better, but still I prefer C# or Java if I want to program, and also my experience in the TypeScript world is not that much, so the nice thing is then with Blazor you can just use C#. And for a .NET developer, that's very nice because then you can just use the same IDE, like Visual Studio or Rider or whatever. And it gives you faster development times, code reuse. You can do everything. You're just starting your application, and then you don't have to switch from the one world to the other. Like with Angular, I used to then you're in the TypeScript IDE, and then you switch to the C# IDE, and it's all different. And in this case, it's all the same, so I quite like that. It is similar to Angular in the form that it is component-based, so you can create UI components and reuse them throughout your application. And it is mainly targeted for web, but you can also use it to create a UI on the desktop or in your apps, your mobile apps. Because then, in that case, the UI is running inside a web view. So that's like a stripped-down browser, which can just render your browser stuff, and then your UI is rendered using Blazor components. And Blazor, you currently have a couple of options. Blazor WebAssembly is, in my view, the most interesting one, and that's also the one I am using. And Blazor Server was the initial technology that was used. So first they created Blazor Server, and Blazor Server means the .NET code still runs on a server, so that's not that interesting. And Blazor Hybrid is, like I just told you, that you can insert your Blazor UI inside a desktop or mobile application. So that's really reusing the Blazor functionality inside another environment, like desktop or mobile. So the WebAssembly variant, it runs on the client side, the C#, and what actually runs is the WebAssembly code, because the C# code gets translated to WebAssembly. And that's all very nice, but then sometimes you still want to use JavaScript stuff, because, for instance, if you want to draw charts using Chart.js, or you want to render 3D using WebGL or whatever, these APIs are in JavaScript. But you can easily call JavaScript code from Blazor, and also from JavaScript you can call C# code. So that's all very nice. This is a small comparison of Blazor Server versus WebAssembly. So the most important thing about WebAssembly is everything runs client-side. Well, everything, of course, the front-end code, and that's compiled C# to WebAssembly. So if you want to run .NET code on the client, then you have to have a runtime there. So this is also, some people see it as a drawback, and it's a small drawback, that initially, if you go to the website, you have to download a stripped down version of the runtime, of the .NET runtime, in order to run the code. But it only takes a few seconds, it's only the first time, so in my opinion, it's not a big deal. Also, a nice thing about the WebAssembly is you can use it as a PWA, Progressive Web Application. And then it looks, for the user, it looks like it's a real app. So you can, that's an option if you use WebAssembly. That's not possible for Blazor Server. You can also even have offline support, and even have a local database on the client. It's all possible. I have not used that myself yet. Another option is ahead of time compilation. So normally the .NET code gets transferred. So it's actually downloading DLLs, the browser, and then it compiles to WebAssembly. But you optionally can also have ahead of time compilation, as they call it. So then the compilation to WebAssembly has already been done. The code runs faster, that's true, but it's also larger, so that's a drawback. So you have to see if it's really needed, because for most applications this performance increase is not really needed. And if you do it, then your application becomes larger to download the first time. So that's you can choose your option. So Blazor Server, it's interesting to mention because it was the first technology and some people still use it. And in that case, the C# code does not run on the client, but for every, if you, for instance, click a button and then some code should run, then it communicates through signal R to the server, and then the code is running there, and then the result is returned. So that's a faster startup, a very thin client, that's all nice, but yeah, everything runs on the server, so you have more load on your server. So it's still an option, some people prefer that in some scenarios. So the progressive web app, that's an option that you can use, and then you get the option in your browser to install it, and you can have it on your desktop. You click on it, it looks like an app, but it's just, it starts the browser inside a normal desktop framework. And then for the user, it looks more like a traditional application. And also you can use this on Android or on Apple on your phone. So of course you cannot use, it looks like an app, but you cannot access your user's hard drive or USB ports, stuff like that. So if you would want to do that, then you still have the option of using Blazor Hybrid. Then you are incorporating the Blazor stuff inside a real desktop or mobile application, and then you have access to everything. So if you are running Blazor codes or C# code on the client side, and you don't have access to some specific stuff, then you would get this exception called platform not supported exception. So they have the .NET runtime, but you know, they cannot, of course, provide everything. You cannot open your COM port, or you cannot open a file or a directory on the file system. And also multi-threading is, I think, still not supported, because normally in the browser that is not something you can easily do, but I've read that some people are experimenting with that. So in the near future, probably you can also have multi-threading on the client side. Yeah, one thing that was, because my current application, I'm dealing with an application that was written in AngularJS, and they want to migrate to Blazor because they're all .NET developers. And then at first I chose Blazor WebAssembly with also the progressive web app support. But then we ran into a problem that this progressive web app has its own local cache, and then if you deploy a new version, then we had some issues with that, and there are solutions for that, but in our case, we just removed the progressive web app support, and that solved the problem. Okay, so Blazor Hybrid, I already told you something about it. So you can hook up your Blazor UI inside a web view control, and it runs in, for instance, WPF. This is a Microsoft technology for desktop applications. And the new way of doing this is in .NET MAUI. That's a successor to Xamarin Forms. So that's all possible, and then you have access to everything because you're running in a native environment. And something new is called Blazor United. This will probably be in the next release of .NET, in .NET 8. And that's actually a combination of different technologies. So sometimes, because Blazor WebAssembly is like a single page application, so if you go, for instance, a crawler would not get the content because it gets rendered on the client side. So that's, in some scenarios you would still for instance, use Razor Pages, that's a Microsoft technology to render HTML on the server side and then push that to the client. And so that's a scenario, the Razor page in the .NET world. Then you have Blazor Server, where the rendering is done on the server and then pushed to the client. And then you have the WebAssembly. So these are the 3 scenarios that you can think of as you're using this in the .NET world. But with Blazor United, they plan to integrate this all into the same thing. So that means that you can create a Blazor component and use this in one of these 3 scenarios, or all of them, of course. So that sounds like a very smart and powerful idea. And there's also been some initial prototyping with the auto mode, where initially they use Blazor Server to start up the application, so you don't need to have the .NET runtime downloaded to the client. And then in the background they still download the .NET runtime and then they switch to WebAssembly. So that sounds like an interesting combination. And then the current drawback of some people complaining, well, the runtime should be downloaded, and the first time you access your application, you have a small delay. That will be gone in that scenario. Okay, so after the break and the dinner, we will have some hands-on. And I have something on GitHub that you can use as a starting point. But we can probably look at that later. And this is also a very simple starting point, so creating a component and seeing the syntax a bit. But there are also in the GitHub repository, there are some other projects as well which deal with other technologies. For instance, for Tailwind, you can integrate Tailwind with Blazor. So normally if you create with Blazor a new project, then by default you get the bootstrap stuff, which is, it's okay, I guess, but I myself prefer Tailwind. Because with Tailwind you have a very modern and flexible way of dealing with your CSS stuff. And well, there are different approaches to integrate Tailwind with Blazor, and in the project I will show one of them, the one that I like, because most approaches on the internet you find they require you to install npm, and that's of course normal if you used to that, but if you're a .NET developer, you probably don't want to go into that. And yeah, with the Tailwind I also like a lot. There's a website called play.tailwind.css, css.com, where you can just interactively play with it. So that's, I'm just mentioning it here briefly. Other things that are in the project are using an API. So you can use swagger.json to generate proxy code. And then you have the C# generated proxy code on the client side, and you can just easily call these proxies to communicate with your API. So that's all with some setup. It's all easy to have that running. Here you see the default Swagger UI you would get, and you can play with. This is just standard Microsoft.NET included. If you do a web project, you have to add some lines of code. And then you can, for instance, during your build process, you can call the Swagger2CS client command, and then it generates the proxy. So these are objects on the client side where you can just call it as if it's the API itself. And of course, it's called a proxy, so it's behind the scenes, it does the HTTP request, it gets the response, but for you as a programmer, you're just calling this this method of the API asynchronously. Then another thing I want to mention is the flux pattern. Maybe some of you have heard of Redux. That's also a pattern that's been used a lot in different front-end technologies. But actually the pattern is called Flux. And Redux is just a library implementing that. Another library is Fluxor, and that's just one you can use in the .NET world. You can use it in Blazor, but you can also use it outside of that. It's just a .NET package you can use to have state management. And it's, for now we don't have enough time to really go into that, but very short, you're in your browser and a user clicks a button, and then what you normally do is you dispatch an action. So there's a dispatcher and there's an action, and so you cannot change state. You can only change state by dispatching an action. And that action can go through a reducer and change the state, or you can have an effect, and that effect can be asynchronous. So then you would have, for instance, a call to an API, you get a result, and then you can dispatch another action which changes the state. So for now, I don't have enough time to really go deep into this, but in my opinion, this is also a very useful technique to use if you have a complex web application. Because some people, if they see it, they are a bit confused because you have actions and effects, reducers, dispatchers, store. They think it's a lot of extra work, but it's just a pattern. And if you set it up using this pattern, it's really, if you have a complex application, it's really helping you to keep it in shape. So I guess for now this is enough. Then we can have a break and have something to eat.
Let's grab some dinner, and then afterwards you're going to show us the
game. I will have a demo of my hobby project, a 3D game created with Blazor, and then I will show some code of the GitHub repo, and then afterwards you can play around with it yourself and you can have interaction.
Great. Shall we do questions now or later?
Yeah, now. Then I can set up the food if you want to move.
Oh, we have questions now. Are there any questions?
So is Blazor only for the front end, or can you build the entire application in Blazor?
No, Blazor is for the front. It's the components for the front end. So if you build the entire application, that's just .NET, right? So
yeah, sure. It's just that you're just mentioning that you can create an API and then have a proxy for that on the client. Whilst if you were having one framework for the entire application, then I would imagine that this would be transparent, right? So that you don't have to think about that. It's just
yeah, but the Blazor is like the UI components, so it's more for the UI.
It's like Angular, but then
then in .NET, yeah. And then you complete, if you build an application, you have all kinds of options. You can create a desktop application, a web application, whatever.
If you're going to create a full application, you have one project with Blazor and one project with the backend in Polygon.
Oh, that's a good. I can show you. So if I go to my favorite environment, it's Rider. Actually, I need at least 2 projects. Well, not entirely true, but there's also the possibility to have a Blazor application which is only a client, but then you don't have any server-side code because you're just running everything in the browser.
Yeah.
So that's one possibility. So, and then the Blazor is on the client side. But normally you have a client and you have server. So the client side is obviously the Blazor part. And there you have some Razor. This is special syntax. So it combines like HTML and also some code. Let me see. So for instance, where do we, let me go to, a button component. Here you see a combination of HTML and this is C# code. So with Razor syntax, you can combine those two in one file. And for simple things, I sometimes do that, but you can also split that up. So this is all client-side code. And then you also have the server project, which is, of course, the back-end code. And in this case, it's very simple. There's not much going on there. But if you would create an API for yourself inside this server project, then you would have controllers and API stuff here.
Yeah, and then you can generate your clients and use that from the Blazor side.
What do you mean generate client?
Well, typically when you've got an API, you also need
Yeah, the proxies, you mean, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That proxy
Yeah.
thing that.
Yeah. And there's also this thing is called the shared project. And the idea is that you can, because now it's the same, right? You're running .NET code on the server and on the client. So you can have, in here you could create classes or functionality that you would use on both sides. So that's possible. So both these projects are referencing this shared thing.
That is very convenient.
Yeah, but now, for instance, in my current assignment, they already had an API, and I've been just generating the proxies, and then, yeah, that's because it was already something that was
That was
existing.
Angular, so it was separate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there like an NPM repository for Blazor components, or do you just use the JavaScript libraries?
Well, there are actually different, there are open source, you mean like UI libraries for components, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff on the internet, of course. So, for instance, I had needed a component to choose a range of dates, and there was a really nice component that I could just grab from the internet. Of course, with Angular, there's a lot of more history, so there's more material, but there are commercial parties that provide Blazor frameworks, so all kinds of standard data grids and stuff like that. In my current assignment, we chose to just build it ourselves, because then you have full control. You can really, but then you have, of course, need to have some time and some knowledge to do that. So there's a lot to be found, but it's, well, in .NET we don't use NPM, but we use NuGet, but it's a similar thing. So you can just grab packages, or you can use a commercial vendor if you prefer.
But you cannot use NPM packages or other types of JavaScript packages within your Blazor.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you can use NPM if you want to, and you can still have JavaScript stuff.
So you can combine them.
Yeah, you can combine it. But then you're talking about going to the JavaScript world, right?
Yeah, there was a part like the interoperability between Blazor and the JavaScript libraries. Yeah, my question was, is it normal to do that if you want to use a library, or is there something?
Yeah, sometimes you have to, because if you're in Blazor, you're running code on the front end, but you cannot, from Blazor, you cannot access the document object model, and sometimes you really need to. And not that much, but so then you can just hook into a JavaScript method, and then. So most of the time in Blazor projects I have a few lines of JavaScript, or if I want to use like Chart.js, some functions to interact with that library. So that's so the JavaScript you can all reuse. That's not a problem. But I was thinking you were referring to like standard components.
Yeah, that was also my question. Just do you have something to tap into so you don't have to create everything yourself?
Yeah.
It could be a problem if it were the components that you wanted to create, like data tables, for example. I always use a package for that because it's so much work to create from scratch. but
Yeah, there are-
simple components I would choose to build them myself as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. For the data table, there's actually a called Quick Grid. That's something which is the developers of Blazor, they provide that, and I actually I looked at that, but that it didn't quite match with the Fluxor way of dealing things. So I took that as a starting point, but then we just created something ourselves. It's just open source code. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions? Yeah?
Does the browser also support debugging of the
Yeah, you can just,
WebAssembly?
yeah, you can just, it's just fully integrated debugging, so you can set breakpoints in your IDE, and you can, but to be honest, because I'm using, well, we will get into that later. There's the hot reload or the .NET Watch approach. You just start your application, you can modify some code, and it gets updated immediately, if you're lucky, because sometimes it doesn't work. But then you get, then it will do a rebuild, so then you have to wait 2 seconds, 3, 4. So in that case, I'm not running inside a debugger. So my way, I'm going back to the old days of just doing print statements sometimes. So print statement, oh, that's,
Don't we all?
yeah, it works. In some cases, it's just okay. So you can have full debugging functionality, everything that you expect, but I'm not using it that much. It's there.
Could you please say something about how you host a Blazor application? Do you
Yeah.
use it in static files in Azure Blob Storage? Or?
Yeah, that's possible, but then it's only for the for instance my games that would be an option, because then everything is just running on the client side. So if you have a static file or static file hosting thing, then you can host those kinds of applications. But otherwise, if you're using like server-side stuff, then of course you need a .NET hosting party.
Right.
So it depends on if you're running, if you're having an API, for instance. But you can, of course, you could create a client-side application that calls into an API somewhere else. Then you don't need that hosting for .NET. You can just have static file hosting.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah, you can just run everything in the client or interact with the server. Are there any security things to watch out for when you do either of those things?
Not that I know of. Yeah, it's just a normal, it's just a browser sandbox. So I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Cross-site scripting, all those things.
Yeah, that's all.
Are those handled for you, or?
No,
Because Angular does that by default, for example.
Okay.
I don't know if Blazor has any protection against those things.
To be honest, I don't know. I would hope so, but like what kind of things does Angular do to prevent it?
Well, it does. It does not trust any resources and external URLs, and it sanitizes every attribute. For example, if you put in a script tag, it will automatically remove it for you or escape it.
I would expect that it's the same as in Blazor, because it's going through their layer. So,
Yeah.
so the attributes, I would expect that they do that, because it's. But I don't have.
Did not come across anything that you thought, oh wait, I have to think about this the next time.
No, not really. Not yet.
Not yet.
But I'm working at NN now, so they have a pretty tight security stuff. So we'll hear about it if there's something wrong.
Yeah, there's always the saying, never trust the client. So if you send anything to a server,
Yeah, but in this case,
expect it to be.
in this case, the clients are all internal people. that are using it. So it's even not running on, in their case, it's not running on the public internet.
Okay.
So it's a very specific scenario maybe. Other questions? So here's the GitHub repo that you can have a look at if we're going to do some hands-on. And so there are a couple of projects there. This is an empty starter project. So you could use this project and then look in the instructions in the others and take this as a starting point if you want to do everything yourself, but maybe that's a bit too far stretched. Then this project is, so you have a client server share, this is a default Blazor setup. This is like introduction to Blazor components. I will show some examples of that part at least, and the other ones is maybe for later if you have time to look at Tailwind or using APIs or Fluxor. But at this time, that's too much to tackle. And here are some instructions to play with it. You need an IDE, for instance, JetBrains Rider, but then you have to download 1 gigabyte. Or maybe you already have Visual Studio, or you can use Visual Studio Code. This is the most lightweight option, and the .NET SDK you can find here. So you can use my setup to experiment. This is also interesting if you want to follow something from Microsoft. This is a tutorial to create a web app with Blazor, but then they use Bootstrap and the default setup. So it's also step by step. So you can choose what you want. This is also an interesting site for more in-depth knowledge, but that's certainly beyond the scope of today. And then I have my 3D game project, which I mentioned before. Yeah, this is just a video of some gameplay. But if you go to it, then you see the very short loading. That was the startup. So I can do it again.
It looks pretty cool. What does it do?
This is, like I said, it was a partial port of a game I once wrote in C++. And this is actually an intro screen. So this is all rendered using WebGL, and this is this UI is on top of it. This is actually these are Blazor components that are rendered. So I can go to full screen, and then I can. There are some options. It's not. So for instance, I can choose for the asteroid option, and then I can fly through an asteroid field. And I'm still working on it, so it's not, there are some bugs with the collision detection, I know that, but because this project, I was working on it for quite a while, but then there was interest in another game of me. That's actually a Java game, which is now released on Steam, and I'm now in my free time I'm working on that one. So this is, for now, it is on hold. Maybe end of life. Never know. So this is.
You built all these graphical components yourself.
Yeah, these asteroids is, well, this, of course I could borrow the code from my previous project. I was generating these asteroids using a 3D noise function. So, and then scaling them differently. And you can switch your camera.
It's quite some sophisticated 3D shit.
Yeah, I think if I look around now at current games, it's quite outdated, but
Yeah, sure.
it,
Still, or
I did it myself and not using any Unity or other stuff. But as I said, the main challenge was to get it at a high frame rate. Yeah, you could choose your vessel. Well, this is all not finished. But anyway, it's a nice demo to see that you can do stuff like this with Blazor. So the UI this is with Tailwind and Blazor components. And then the 3D rendering is using the JavaScript interoperability. Just to show what is potentially possible. So let's take a look at the Blazor demo project. So in the client side, you have your normal index.html. This is actually the starting point of the application. And well, if you start this application, then what you will see is this loading. And then in the background, it's starting up the Blazor framework. So this is initially what gets served to the client. And this part that I marked here, this will be replaced by your actual Blazor application. So I'm not sure if it's still running. So this is the, application is of course not very interesting visually, but let's just see what happens if I would do empty cache and hard reload. Then you see, very short, you see the loading. So that's the index.html. And then all kinds of stuff gets downloaded. So where's my network? You see some stuff downloaded. My favorite icon is probably gone. So here do you see the blazor.boot.json. And there you actually see that it's downloading all these .NET DLLs with a certain code to check if it's the right version. So all this stuff gets downloaded, so that's quite something.
you know what size it is?
I don't know actually, but should be able to see that in a networking, right? But
There on the right side. No, a lot.
so where would you see this?
Well, you can see the size like over there.
Here, yeah.
So now
It doesn't show the.
show the DLLs.
No. Maybe it gets cached in another way. I'm not sure. Normally this would clear your cache, right? But that's not. So maybe it's another part of it, but I'm not sure. Some storage. Well, maybe we can look at this later. I'm not. I don't know. But actually, what I wanted to show you is that you see for a while, you see this loading. So that's the index.html, and this is actually the rendered content from the Blazor project. and that's, you can see here, index.razor. So this is a Razor or a Blazor page, and it has this add page directive. So this page is just the initial page, and if you have another page, this is like a part of your URL. So if I go to index.razor and I have a simple href to step 2, then I end up in this part. So like this, you see this URL changes. But actually this is of course all done client side. So
Is there like a router for Blazor applications, or do you have to do everything with these decorators?
and normally you just do it like this. I'm not sure if there's another way to do the routing. There is a navigation manager in which you can, because I said it was client side, but I was lying because this is just going, I don't think this is intercepted. But there is something later in the, I can't. Yeah, this is navigation manager. This is something you can inject. So you can inject components in your page. Then you have this navigation manager, and then you can use that one to navigate to another page, and then it will all stay on the client because it will just render this page, this other page that you're referring to. So this is the first thing. It says, well, you can create this project as a starting point, and it talks about the index.razor with the page directive. What I wanted to show here, and I can just mention it, is something that bugged me in the beginning. So you can create components, and you can create them in a certain folder. So I can create this one, first Blazor component. So simply by creating a file which is called Blazor component.razor, you can have some markup, you can have some code. Then you would be able to use this in your Blazor application like this. But you have to remember to add this folder to the imports. That's something in the beginning. Sometimes you create a component and it's just not working. But then it means you have forgotten this line. So it's using this as to search the namespaces for the components to be compiled and to be used. So if you see here, this is also a different syntax highlighting because this is a Blazor component. But if I were to remove this line here, or comment it out, oops, then this component would not be picked up. So this is a common mistake that I just wanted to mention. Well, the syntax highlighting, normally then this would change.
And also the imports on the page.
What do you mean, import?
You've got imports there, but that's for all the pages, right?
These imports are for the Razor stuff, so then it knows all to look in these folders.
But if you want to, say, only import certain components in, say, like step 4 or whatever, can you put the app using Blazor knowledge?
A certain component, no, but this is just for, so this doesn't cost anything. It's just for when you're referring to a component that it knows where to look.
Okay.
So it is not. So in this case, we have page 2, and it's just some HTML, and here's actually the Blazor component is being used. And like we saw, it's very simple, it's just any HTML. So in the next page, go to the next page, then we see here this gets rendered here because this is the component. And this talks about using .NET Watch, step 2. And this, I already did that in a terminal window. You start up this .NET Watch shell script or batch file if you're on Windows. And it's actually watching for changes. So now I am on step 2. So if I would change something here in this file, let me try. Just say hello and then save it. Oh, then this is what you normally don't want, because now you have to, it didn't detect the change correctly, so you should just say always, and then it will always restart if there's an error. So I made this simple change, and for some reason it was not able to deal with that, but normally it should. Yeah, okay. So now it's rebuilding. So this is a bit of a work in progress. It's already much better than in the beginning. So normally if you do small visual changes, it will just do the hot reload and immediately in place change the things. But yeah, in some cases it's not working, and then it just does a quick rebuild. Okay, then it says here, if you would copy like the index.razor somewhere else, copy this file to create a new page, and then you would get, we can actually do that. If my shortcuts are not working, why not? Paste. Let's call it index2.razor. Not now. So now I have 2 pages with the same URL, and that's of course not going to work. So then we get something like this. So this is the standard way. If Blazor has an error, you get this message. You can also restyle it, because this is coming from the index.html. So like this. So if you want to have it in a different style, you can just restyle this one. So this, if you have something like this, then normally what I do, I go to the console, and then you get some nice error messages. And it's clear error message. It says the following routes are ambiguous in this index 2 and in index. So sometimes you have to go here and look in the console to see if something is going wrong. So if I could just call this index 2. Then it should be good to go. Yeah, there we're now we're back. Let's see. Oh yeah, this normally if you do the .NET Watch run, it would ask this question, which was, I think, very annoying, because I always want to restart. And then I've found out that there's this option, it's quite new, to always restart. So let's look a bit more at components. If you have we are going to create a banner component. Look here. This banner component has a parameter. This is typical Blazor syntax. So this is a property in C# syntax. It's a string text property, but it is used as a parameter. And I can use this property inside my HTML markup and just put this add sign. It's like escape for C# code. This is a Razor syntax, if you were familiar with that.
So if you want to use that parameter in your HTML, then you have to give it the parameter attribute. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let me see. Here I'm using two banner components. So this text is the property, but it has a parameter attribute. So then I can use it in the Blazor syntax to pass values into it. So this can be string, but it can also be an object or whatever.
What happens if you have two parameters?
Yeah, then you would get like name equals blah blah blah, etc.
So why is the first one named text?
And then that's just the name I chose. So I created a banner component. I gave it a parameter text.
Right.
So the name of the property is the name that you use.
You just use bad naming.
Yeah, of course. Just to confuse you.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
So this is component parameter. So you can use this to set any parameter on any component. So this is actually maybe more interesting styling, but let's skip that. Then we have events. So for instance, if you want to create a button component and somebody clicks the button, you want to react on that event in code. So this is just HTML syntax, and then you have this add on clicked. It refers to this event callback. And then if you're using this button component, you can connect your own callback to this on-clicked event. So that's an easy way to have components respond. So again, this is the button component, and now we have this event callback. Property is called onClicked, so it means I can assign a method or a piece of code to this parameter, and it gets called when this event from the HTML world gets triggered. And of course, you have all kinds of other events as well. If you do here add, oops, here you can see all kinds of common HTML events that you can connect to. This is also something new. Editor required means that if somebody uses this component, this parameter is required. So let's look at this usage. Here we have a button component with the text click me, and the onClicked is hooked up to a callback method. And this is actually C# code, it's just here. And it's just saying console write line, so this appears in the development tools. And we add the date there. So let's see if that actually works. Okay, we're already in the console, so if I click here, you see it's working here. So then we have dependency injection, which is of course a very powerful mechanism which is already used a lot in the back end. And of course in Angular, you're also familiar with that one. And there's a special syntax in Razor pages. It's called inject. And you can just inject anything that is registered in the dependency injection services. So in this case, I'm injecting the navigation manager standard component, and that's one you can use to get the current URI or to navigate to another component page. So this is the syntax to inject a component into the Razor page. And then you can just use this thing here. And this callback. There's a code below. So you can also, sometimes you can use asynchronous callbacks or synchronous. That's just, you don't have to do anything special. If you hook up a callback which is asynchronous, it also just works. And so the normal callback is to navigate to this URL and to write something on the console. And this is just an example of an asynchronous call. And then we change the text, we delay, and then we change the text again, etc. So let's see. So this is using the navigation manager, the synchronous variant. This is the asynchronous one. 3, 2, 1, and then it goes. So that's not something you normally do, but it's just an example to show that you can use asynchronous methods. Yes? Yeah?
I'll ask my question later.
Okay, that's good. But this is just an example that it is possible to inject components or objects in the Razor syntax, but it's not something I would normally do, at least not like this is becoming a big thing, so then I prefer to have it split. And then if you want to have that, you just have all your HTML is here, or your Razor, and the C# is somewhere else. You can use the add inherits construct, and you inherit from another class which contains all the C# code. That's like this. And then the syntax looks a bit different because now we're in the C# land and not in Razor land. So then we have this inject attribute to say, I'm going to inject this. It's basically doing the same, but the syntax is different. And
You can also inject your own classes.
yeah, if you in this here you see add scoped, you can, or singleton or whatever. A transient is not applicable to Blazor. You can just, you register your own stuff here, and then you can inject it everywhere in your code.
Oh yeah, so you first need to make it managed.
Sorry?
You need to make it managed.
What do you mean manage?
Well, you need to register your...
Yeah, you have to register it to the services, otherwise the injection dependency thing doesn't know where to get it from, or if it's a singleton. Or so on the server side, you normally have like transient, scoped, and singleton as options, but transient doesn't make any sense on the client side, so that doesn't exist, or it will probably give an error message. Okay, so this is basically doing the same thing, but then different syntax. Last two things I want to mention is how about state management? Normally, if you change something in the code, then automatically the state has changed method, which says to Blazor, oh, something has changed, you have to re-render. And it does it very smart. Only if a big page and there's only this small part that has changed, it will re-render only that part. Normally that goes automatically. So if I just click here on add item, maybe you should first look at the code. So here I have a list of items, list of strings. If I click on this add item thing, then I end up in this callback, and it says items.add, a new date. And these items are rendered by the items component, which has a parameter items, and it's just a simple for loop for each item. It just renders a div. So you see, if I add a new item, automatically the rendering updates and everything is okay. That's for simple scenarios. And there's also this toggle callback. It says this property show. So if show, this is of course something like ngIf, something similar. If this condition is true, this gets rendered, otherwise it doesn't get rendered. So here you see this. So that's all fine. But sometimes you need to call a state has changed manually. There's a link to some other documentation about that. And that's not something you would want to think about, in my opinion. So that's the bridge to Fluxor. If you use the Fluxor stuff, then there's a whole state management thing behind it. And that's also takes automatically care of these state has changed things. So if you are dispatching an action and the state has been changed, then the re-rendering will take place automatically. So I guess that's it for the Blazor introduction. And it's time for some questions now. And then if you want to play along with the code and have questions, and later it's fine. So there's a question here.
Yeah, I was going to ask about separating the code from the template, but you actually already explained that.
Yeah, because normally you don't want this mixed, at least. Yeah, for some, like a simple button component, I still do it, but if you have a page which is quite complicated, then I prefer to have the...
There's something to be said for both. I think that in the, what is that, framework? Come on, frontend master.
Vue.
Yeah, exactly, in Vue, it's also mixed, I think.
Yeah, and React does it as well.
Yeah.
That is the GSX.
Then there's no separation possible?
Yeah, it's the same thing. You render, you have like a render method, and that's where you output the JavaScript mixed with HTML. I don't think you can separate it.
Okay.
And Angular has support for it to do everything in one file, but it's common to separate it.
Yeah.
Because every generator generates the four files for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's something to be said for having everything, particularly for simple components, to have it in one file.
Yeah, so it's possible.
It's just a matter of style, what you like.
Yeah.
Personally, I very much enjoy the Angular style, that everything is in one folder and got everything separated. Yeah, this also looks quite clean.
Yeah, in this case with the inheritance like this, then
Yeah.
this can be in a totally different location, and it usually is because normally I put these things in my Fluxor project because you want to unit test that stuff. And well, with the unit testing, this is also possible to unit test, but I'm not really doing it at the moment. There's a framework called BUnit where you can unit test the front-end stuff. So, but normally I stop at the Fluxor state management testing, and if that's working, that's good enough for me. But
Yeah.
It's actually looking very
UI
simple.
for Cypress or something. You test the UI with Cypress, or
we don't test the UI. Yeah, it depends on the complexity of the project and how many people are working on it and how likely it is to break, how many time and money you want to invest in testing the whole thing.
Yeah, it's always something to ignore in the in the early stages and feel the pain in the later stages.
Yeah, well currently where I'm working now, they have the AngularJS front end, which is of course very much outdated, and they didn't have any testing at all.
So this is better.
So this is a step ahead.
That looks very simple actually, so I like that.
Where do the tests live? If you would write tests. next to the component itself, or in a
No, you can
separate
just
directory?
no, you can just create a test project and write unit tests.
And then you bootstrap the application or something, and.
No, you're talking about the UI testing.
No, component specific or your state.
Yeah, normally you could just create another project. It's called a unit test project, and you can choose if you want to use MSDev, MSTest, or NUnit or XUnit.
And then test on code level. You just calling classes.
Yeah, so that's unit test, and you can also create, of course, an integration testing. And there are frameworks like Playwright, and I'm not sure, maybe it's only for .NET. That's actually an end-to-end testing system.
Yeah.
And there's VUnit that's specifically testing the UI stuff. Really, headless, yeah, with headless browser. So
Okay.
stuff like you are used to in Angular, I guess.